Friday in Simpsonville, South Carolina. I want to speak to you about MBOs. What are MBOs? Well, it's in the business world, management by objectives. What I had to use at ITT and Stromberg Carlson. And when I went into the ministry, when God called me into the ministry, it was ministry by objectives. And I asked my staff each year to set ministry objectives. But today I want to speak to you on the subject of me by objectives, because I believe the book of James tells us to do that. Let me just share with you a little write-up that I thought you might enjoy to get started on the subject. In Alice in Wonderland, at one point Alice says to the Cheshire Cat, "Would you tell me, please, which way I should go from here?" The cat responds, "That depends a good deal on where you want to go." Alice says, "I don't care much." Then the cat says, "It doesn't matter which way you go." As with Alice, so many of us wish and we look, and the church wishes and looks, but without objectives, we have nowhere to go. We'll just keep wandering aimlessly. I think that's true in our Christian lives. Salvation and then sanctification requires objectives. James deals with that. In chapter 4, verse 1, he says, "What is the source of your quarrels?" He talks about lust and envy. And he talks about asking. And he even tells us when we ask why we don't get. We ask with the wrong motives, only asking for our own pleasure. And he tells us that if we're friends with the world, we're hostile towards God. And if we are hostile towards God, that means the friendship with the world makes us an enemy of God. So what are 10 meaningful objectives from the book of James for each of us as Christians for this year? Well, chapter 4, verse 5 says we need to be very, very careful that the Spirit dwells in us and that we use the gifts of the Spirit. And so one of the things that I would say to you should be a me objective would be that we would know the gifts and talents that we have and use those for the God's glory. Number 2, it says that God's opposed to the proud and gives grace to the humble. That means one of our objectives should be to stay humble, watch our pride. Number 3, tells us to submit to God. That means that even if we don't understand what he wants, we need to submit to his leadership. Recently, I had a discussion with a Christian brother, and we were kind of debating back and forth, and finally he said, "I believe God is leading me to do this." And I said, then the argument is over, because I'm not going to argue with God. If God's told you to do it, then you probably ought to do it. And then number 4, not only are we to submit to God, but we're to resist the devil. There are temptations and dangers everywhere. Television, internet, everywhere we turn. We live in a very perverse society. And we need to be careful not only to submit to God, but to resist the devil. Put up our guard. Number 5, draw near to God and he'll draw near to you. Every day of our Christian life, we ought to try to make an attempt to draw nearer to him. That means spending some time with him. He desires for us to read his word and then sometimes just be still and listen to his still small voice. Number 5 was draw near to God and he'll draw near to you. Number 6, cleanse your hands. If you're doing some things that you ought not be doing, if you've been involved in some things that are improper, that means you need to confess those to God and repent and turn away from those things. Clean hands. And then it goes on in verse 8 and gives us the next one, number 7, purify our hearts. And he says double-minded, because many of us are. We have 2 different standards. We have a standard that we talk about and a standard that we do. We need to have pure hearts. Number 8, we need to humble ourselves. Humble ourselves, and it says He will exalt you. Number 9, don't speak against one another. Don't speak against one another. Don't gossip. Don't pass on unedifying stories, even if they're true. If they don't glorify God and they will hurt the saints, don't pass those stories on. Number 9, that was number 9. Number 10, do not judge. Oh, it's so easy to compare others with ourselves. And it's so easy to compare ourselves with others. But the standard is God. And we need to compare ourselves with God. And be careful only to judge ourselves and not our brothers and sisters. Why should we have these management by objectives or these me by objectives? Well, it's very clear. In chapter 4, verses 13 through 17, he says, life is like a vapor. And it is, isn't it? I can't believe how old I've gotten. I can't believe that I'm no longer a teenager or in my 20s. Because life has gone by like a vapor. It didn't seem like it at the time as it was going by. But now that I'm at the age that I am, I realize how fast it's gone. In closing, he says, if you know what's right to do and you don't do it, it's sin. When I hit those 10 objectives for all of us as Christians, was there one that kind of hit you hard? If you know what's right to do and you don't do it, it's sin. I hope that you'll make some adjustments and you'll look at next year and look back on this year and say, how did I do on my ministry by objectives, my management by objectives, and my me by objectives? Was I pleasing to God? That's your thought for the day. God bless you and have a good day.